Okay, cool. So we can just like get started. So like I don't know how many of y'all got the agenda, but if you didn't, we'll be kind of doing introductions, community norms, discussing our responses to blackness and whiteness that most of you have filled out on the original Google form when you decide you want to participate, right? We'll be talking about the article that we read and the podcast that we listened to, and then after that, the last two things will probably never change for each session. There'll always be like final thoughts and notes that you have towards the end of our session, and then next time and like segues. So like what we'll be discussing next time, what to prepare for next time. So yeah. And again, this was like super quick turnaround as well. So like don't feel bad if you probably like didn't read through the entire article or anything like that. Because again, like it's summer. I don't want this to be another class for y'all, right? Um, so yes, if anybody wants to start, or I guess I can start. Um, Hello again. My name is AJ Foster. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a fifth year at the University of Missouri studying Black Studies with double minors in psychology and criminal and juvenile justice. And this year I was selected to be a summer fellow, and so that's what we'll be like participating in is Race in the American Story, which is a course that's offered through Black Studies and Political Science at the University of Missouri in Mizzou for the people that kind of that go there, like the people who are also in that class. Um, so yeah, anybody can start. Feel free to jump on in. Um, yes, or I can pick somebody to start.
I can go. Can I go, AJ?
Of course.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Stephanie Shanakan. I am a professor at the University of Massachusetts, but I'm on my way back to Mizzou. I'll be back at Mizzou this fall. So I'm excited to work with so many of you, and I'm so excited about AJ and this topic. But I'm happy to also see some UMass folks, and I hope there's some ASU folks in the room as well. And so AJ, I would just recommend you pick on people to go next, otherwise everybody's going to be shy.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Okay, we can start with Grace.
Hi guys, my name's Grace. I'm going to be a junior next year and I'm a biology major. And yeah, that's really it. Hey.
Okay, Brooke, you can go.
Hi everyone, my name is Brooke. I'll also be a junior in the fall, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm majoring in Spanish and journalism.
And then Dre, you can go.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm going into my sophomore year at Mizzou, and I'm currently studying political science and Black studies.
Okay, go ahead, Carson.
I am Carson. I will be a sophomore in the fall. I use she, her pronouns, and I major in strategic communications.
Cool. Vida, go ahead. Sorry, y'all. I'm just like.
Hi, I'm Vida. I use she, her pronouns. I'm gonna be a junior in the fall, majoring in philosophy with a textile apparel management minor.
Cool. Then Aisha.
Hi, I'm Aisha. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a program specialist at the Multicultural Center, and I graduated in 2019.
Cool. Then Keenan, you can go.
Hi, I'm Keenan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm going to be a senior, and I'm studying accounting and econ and minoring in peace studies.
And then Jacqueline. Did I say that right?
Yeah, I'm Jackie. I just graduated from UMass Amherst with a major in public health, and I'm now at nursing school at Mass General.
Oh, cool. Need more nurses. And then, okay, I'm sorry. Is it Leticia?
Hey, that's me. Hey guys, my name is Leticia. I'm from Brazil actually, and I study languages, Portuguese and English.
Okay, and then Kiesitz, and then Bailey, and then Kaylin.
Hello, I'm Kiesitz. I use she or they pronouns. I go to Mizzou and I'm a sophomore.
Hi, my name is Bailey. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a sophomore at Mizzou studying constitutional democracy.
Hi, I'm Kaylin Hayward. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior in high school and sophomore at Mizzou studying.
And then Will and Logan and Anusha, Sid, Maya, and then Stephanie. If y'all can remember that, I'm sorry.
Hey everybody, I'm William Sullivan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a junior studying business marketing at Mizzou. I apologize for how unprepared I am for this call, but I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah.
I think I'm next.
Go ahead. Sorry, my bad.
Sorry.
My bad.
All right. Hi, I'm Anusha. I'm a sophomore studying sociology and history at Arizona State University. I use the pronouns she and hers, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Hey, yeah, go ahead, Logan. Oh, okay.
My name is Logan Gibson. I use he, him pronouns, and I graduated from Mizzou last year.
Then Maya, Stephanie, and then Sid.
Hi everyone, I'm Maya. I actually don't attend Mizzou anymore. I transferred last year, so I go to Lewis University. I'm a senior there studying aviation administration and starting my master's in transportation and aviation.
Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie, she, her. I'm at the University of Missouri. Currently, I'm a doctoral candidate, trying to finish up my dissertation, and my focus is in higher education.
What's up, Stephanie?
Hey.
Hey, girl. I guess we should let Adam go as well.
Oh, sorry, Sydney, last person to introduce herself. Oh, it did, Adam. Yeah, my bad. I was already talking to Adam before this. I was just like completely forgot. Sorry.
Hi everyone, I'm Sydney. I use she, her pronouns. I am going to be a 5th year at Mizzou studying journalism and French. Yeah, me and AJ.
Yeah.
Here we go.
We're there. And then Adam, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, so Adam Seagrave, I'm a professor at Arizona State University, co-director of the Racing American Story Project with Stephanie. Really happy to see you all here. Excited for the conversation. Yeah, it's good to see you.
Okay, cool, y'all. So, just like some community norms that we had all kind of shared in the Google Drive, which was like super surprising me. We all kind of like said very similar things. The biggest one being intent versus impact, and knowing that whatever you say, you may not have you may have not intended to hurt someone or harm someone, right? But the impact was still there, and we must recognize that, apologize for it, and vow to kind of like move forward and do better, right, with our words, our language, actions, or anything we share. Also, safe space, brave space. I want to make sure that what's like said here, people feel safe enough to share their experiences, no matter how they identify. And I want us all to respect that and understand that, and also not come to things in a colorblind approach, and kind of recognizing and I don't know by now, I kind of be rambling and stuttering a little bit too, my bad. But like recognizing and appreciating how different we all are on this call, I think are some really important ones. And obviously like and I'm going off about like what you all had said, right? So if anybody wants to like add some more, like just kind of talk, and like maybe like 2 or 3 more if they want to add. But that is like a living and breathing document, so it can always change and can always be added to, and it can always get more specific, right? So if anybody had any like really cool ones that I know some people on this call know about, feel free to add it.
I have one real quick.
Oh, sorry, you go.
Sorry. Like one I've been thinking about, like trying to do better about is like using like gender neutral terms. So not being like, hey guys, but hey y'all, hey everyone, people, folks, not using like, when you're talking, don't say like boys and girls or men and women, but just people in general. Happy
Yeah.
Pride Month.
Love that one.
One thing I said was, like, if you happen to be on the end of the impact versus intent, like whether you're the one who accidentally like made someone feel upset or like whatever, judged or anything, like to that person should be, well, not should be, but like I hope that this is a space where someone would feel comfortable saying that they have felt offended. And then like the same on the other side. So like if I, you know, hear something that offends me or I'm like, dang, that full out of pocket, you know,
yeah,
like to be able to say that and just bring that up to everyone, because a lot of times like if one person feels it, it's not just that one person.
Yeah, I hear you. And then to kind of tack onto that in addition, if you do harm somebody with language that you say or anything you do, don't expect the person that you harm to be super open in telling you that, because, you know, sometimes like things can make us uncomfortable. We can, like, especially if, like you said, a microaggression, you don't realize it. But if other people on this call recognize it, I definitely encourage everyone to call it in and call it out. And we can always like deviate from the normal schedule and kind of unpack that as well. Like, cause that'll be something that I want to continue to do and I want to be able to do. So yeah, thanks for adding that. If you have any more, you can drop them in the chat box if there is one. I don't know, I can't see. But to move on to the content of what this conversation is about, we'll be kind of discussing like what we all filled out on the form or what other people filled out on the form about our kind of idea of Blackness and whiteness. So I asked you all to kind of bring two different working definitions that others on this call have like defined as Blackness and whiteness. And so can I get a few people to share the ones that they picked out and kind of like their thoughts about it?
One that like,
oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go for it.
Cool, thank you. One that like two actually that stuck out to me. I think they were probably maybe the same person, but they were both the one word, and like the description of whiteness was ease, and the description of Blackness was humanity. And I thought that was like, yeah, they were both one words, but they made me think like, huh, like, wow, that's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead, Grace.
Kind of go off of that, like the whiteness is ease. Somebody else said that whiteness means default. And like I, being white, I've recognized that sometimes like works in my favor. And like when I talk to my family or talk to anyone, when I say like, oh, a girl, or like, oh, like I saw some person, like I saw family, like in my mind, I try not to like point out race because that's like, it's important to recognize, but like when I'm telling a story, it's not important. And so I just recognize that my family probably like goes to white when I say a person or a girl or whatever. And it reminded me of, I don't know if anybody's seen the movie A Time to Kill, but yeah, there was like part of that movie, like the lawyer in the court case, what happened was these white men like raped and killed this little girl, and she was Black, and then her dad went and killed them, or I think, I watched it a long time ago. Anyway, he told the court, like the jury, he was like, imagine a little girl gets raped and smacked and beaten and all of this, and then at the end he was like, now imagine that she's white. And so it's just a strange contrast that, like, you know, the jury would assume that if a girl's being raped and beaten, she's Black. So
Yeah. Anybody else kind of want to talk about or like say which two they picked out? Maybe like three more. Yeah, go ahead, Vita.
The one that I saw was like whiteness. To me means given the position of privilege and hopefully using it to help empower others. And I was just like, I just thought of like, how can like whiteness be used to empower other people? Because like, how do you give power away? And also like, in order for something to be powerful, does that mean that there's going to be someone on the opposing end of that? So like, this power always entail oppression. So like, it was really interesting to me. And then the one about Blackness was, I'm not going to read all of it, but the end of it said, I think Blackness as something created and formed in spite of whiteness. And because the way I look at Blackness is very diasporical, because I want it to entail me as well, because I'm African. So like whenever they wrote that, I was like, wow, like that's really beautiful, because it's kind of like, because, you know, of course, you know, Blackness, descendant of slaves, they were like oppressed a lot. So like in spite of, you know, whiteness, Blackness was created. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay, maybe like two more. Don't be shy. Give me your definitions. No? Okay.
I can go again.
Oh, yeah.
The two that stood out to me, I think, again, they were like probably by the same person, but like when it was like white of non-Hispanic race and then Black of non-Hispanic race, I think that like Hispanic and like Latinx people are like, I think it's like an interesting situation, I guess, because like you can be like Afro Latinx or white Latinx. So I just feel like it's like sometimes viewed as this third category, but since it's an ethnicity and not a race, I feel like it gets confused a lot. And that's just like something that I got a better understanding recently of, is that like, you know, like similar to like as you can be like Jewish and you could be like white or Black, and to like speaking like ethnicity wise, it's similar to Hispanic and like Latinx, if that makes sense. So I don't know, I think like the way that Hispanic is always, you know, like on a like on like a race survey or something, like it's always like, what's your race, and then are you like Hispanic or not? I think that just like is an interesting way to approach like that conversation, because yeah, they're not like mutually exclusive.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody else before I say the ones that stood out to me really quickly?
I can go.
I'll go. Is that okay?
No, go ahead.
Okay. The ones
Carson, then Logan.
Me?
No, go ahead, Carson.
Okay, sorry. The like one word ones again, like ease, and then for Blackness it was like other, because usually like whiteness is like the common or like default, which is what was called the definition. And so I think that is like really similar to looking at like racism, is like, yes, it hurts one side, but it also benefits another side. It's like looking at that as like, that's the default and that's like the other. So those stuck out to me a lot.
Yeah. And then Logan, go ahead, and then I'll say mine, then we can move on.
All right, the ones that like stuck out to me, I picked two from the whiteness ones. It said, like paraphrases, like whiteness is stolen from other cultures, and whiteness as default, meaning race does not like affect your identity. And the Blackness ones were Blackness is features, and then as like an umbrella for the African diaspora, and then Blackness like as the diaspora. I just thought like there was a common theme that these like statements kind of highlighted for me, was that like whiteness is so often seen as like something that's formed or rallied around like institutions, whereas Blackness is like formed and like embodied by the actual people themselves, as opposed, so like we don't even see like whiteness as like related to people as much as we see it as like institutions, and Black people we inherently like think of as like the actual people.
Yeah. I actually was gonna say something super similar. Like the one that stood out to me about whiteness talked about skin color. It said, hold on, I'm trying to read it by definition, but it was like skin color, marker of what prejudices and privileges that may exist. And I thought it was interesting to make that distinction between, or to specify that it's skin color, instead of like saying like, oh, that's like, it's just white people. That's what whiteness is. And then for Blackness, I thought it was interesting. The one that I thought was interesting was, that's not my place to answer, but I would love to learn more. That one really stood out to me as well, because I think a lot of times, or a lot of like the conversations I have with, or conversations I used to have with like my non-Black friends, is them not wanting to overstep or not wanting to think about what whiteness is or what Blackness is, because they may not identify with it. And so I think it's always interesting to kind of think about what we feel like we shouldn't have an opinion on, or what we shouldn't really comment on because of like the identities that we hold ourselves. And that was not to necessarily say like that was right or wrong. It was just like super interesting that it literally was just like, it's not my place to answer what Blackness is. And this came from somebody who was not Black, for some context. But I did think that that was really interesting. But again, I want to thank all of y'all too for like answering, even the people who didn't, so it's okay, like again. But Sydney kind of mentioned a really cool segue to our next kind of like discussion. Our topic is talking about like the articles and the podcasts that we had listened to. So if anybody kind of just wants to have like, or just want to talk about like our initial reactions, thoughts, what they liked about the podcast, what they didn't like, anything like that first before we kind of like delve into how they're related to one another.
I can go. One thing that stuck out to me from the podcast was like coming to the realization that all African people don't, like all African as an umbrella term for like African Americans, whether you're from Nigeria or Jamaica, like all that identifies like that, all of those cultures don't use the term Black. Like they don't describe themselves as Black. And that's something that I didn't realize really until I came like to Mizzou, because it was an instance where someone I know who I would consider as Black didn't necessarily consider as Black because they thought they identify as Jamaican and that's it. And at first I was like, what is it? Like, I didn't understand. I thought it was like, for me, I kind of felt offended. I really don't understand why, but it was just something that I didn't understand or realize, that this idea of race and Black literally came from America. So other countries don't identify with the term Black. It's just something new that I heard in the podcast.
Yeah.
Something I thought about and really liked. Was someone else talking?
No, I think it was me saying anybody else, so it's okay.
Something that I really liked about the podcast was the discussion of like reparations and how that relates to the government, I think, and like just like, okay, it depends on where you're coming from and what your situation was during times when people were enslaved. And so like I thought that was really interesting because I have never really thought about that. I think about our government, well, like American government. And so just looking at that and looking at like how, like I often think about like US slavery and I don't necessarily think about the effects of Black people in other places and what that means for Black people in other places. So yeah, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and I think that point, because that stood out to me too, about the podcast, and I think that point kind of relates to what Logan was talking about with this idea that with Blackness, you think of it in terms of like people and culture and like individualistic things, right? Or just like a community of people. But like whiteness, you always almost associate it with like institutions, with power, with privilege. Like what can you get away with? What are you allowed to get away with, right? And so I think that was an interesting kind of way to look at Blackness and kind of like a sense of like an institution or a sense of like, okay, well, these are rules. When most of the time we're always taught, or I guess like a lot of, or I can only speak for myself, but like what I've always been taught or what I've always like thought about is like how Blackness is not a monolith. And I think that the beginning of the podcast where they were like, oh, like, you know, what are you, or like, how do you identify? People were saying so many different things. And then further on, it was somebody, like a Black man was saying like, oh, like, honestly, like, if I had the choice, like, I would identify myself as a Negro. And it's because of this specific experience, this specific, like I said, specific experience that Black Americans have in the context of like institutions, and slavery and racism and Jim Crow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So I thought that was an interesting part of it as well, in relation to like what Logan was talking about with this idea of like institutions kind of never being associated with Blackness. And that might come from whiteness, or white being like the default, right? That a lot of us were talking about, or a lot of us, like I said, on our survey. But yeah, anybody else? What did y'all think about the article? I know, Keenan, you had posted the article on Instagram. What did you like about it? I don't mean to call you out. I'm sorry.
I thought, like, or what struck me, like, what comes like from the top of my head and what I'm still thinking about since I read it was like the idea of racialization. Just like because I had like kind of read about it before, and I think the article like really hit hard on the idea that when we talk about race, it isn't a discussion on like biology or genealogy. It's like a discussion about our like social structures. And like for me, and I'm sure like other people that can relate, like not to like center it around me or anything, but the idea of something being racialized, like for me who's like Caucasian biologically, but like is Arab, so like people would like might say look at me and say I'm brown, or look at me and say I'm white, and I think that's like similar to like other people's experiences. That's why it just kind of like struck with me. And also the website has like a glossary with like a lot, like over 100, I think, that if you guys haven't seen, I would check out. And I was kind of reading through it earlier.
Yeah,
I'll say something. What was really interesting for me was, I know the article said anti-racism is an active process. And that was really interesting to me, because usually when something happens, like how like now there's a lot of media and people are vocalizing through that. When something happens, people are quick to call out racism and racist, but that's it. There's no act on over that. And I think it's interesting because now we're being active with protests, we're being active with petitions. But it's also, the article also mentioned that it's the continuous process of identifying these systems, these structures, and changing them. But we don't talk that far. We just want to deal with one thing, but we don't think about how we can be purposeful in changing a structure or a system. We don't think about it on a systematic level. We just think about it at hand with people.
Yeah. Anybody else? That's okay. We can sit in silence and reflect a little bit too. I think that kind of like what Keenan has said, when I had found this resource, I first found it when I was kind of thinking about, okay, in what ways do I, as a Black person, perpetuate racism? How do I, as a Black person, perpetuate anti-Blackness, right? And so I really was coming here to kind of think or read about anti-racism. But then when I had found like this glossary and thinking about, okay, for a long time it took me a long time to know the difference between race and ethnicity. And I think that's a common like mistake that a lot of people make. Because Sydney was talking about it earlier. And So I was like reading through the definitions and reading through, okay, we were talking about, or my hope is to talk about race relations and talk about accurate and inaccurate depictions of race in the movie Get Out, right? Kind of a segue into that, because the main character, like the movie was set to talk about race relations in America, right? And so bringing up this point again that the main character does not identify as African American, and so thinking about, okay, like how does that kind of render, like how does that reframe the way we look at the movie? How do we look at sexualization of like Black bodies and Black men's bodies, right? And with a lot of the scenes where like non-Black people were physically touching him. And so thinking about that and thinking about, well, where are we currently, like what path are we currently moving, kind of what Maya had mentioned, and how are we being intentional in recognizing these things, calling these things in or out, and then making sure that we check ourselves if we're perpetuating it, or we're making sure that we're not perpetuating it, right? So this idea that you can never, like allyship is not a noun, like it's a verb. Like you work towards it, like you're constantly working towards it. And even allyship is a weird word for me personally. I think honestly, like I've recently just started using the word accomplice. While you may not do the harm specifically, just your being, and to know that if you do want to work towards allyship, you have to recognize that just your being, things that you say, things that you do, consciously or unconsciously, kind of perpetuates isms and like violence, really, right? Because a lot of what a lot of people don't talk about with the movie Get Out is how, like I personally think like emotionally violent it was to just watch it, especially in theaters with a predominantly white audience, and knowing that, and I had seen the movie 3 times. I seen it once, like it was predominantly white audience, and the last 2 times I seen it with a lot of Black people. And those were 2 different experiences, just watching it with the people around me who I didn't even know. And so kind of like this idea that I'm even reflecting on race relations, like not even just in the movie, but outside of me, just in these settings around. So yeah, if anybody had any other thoughts about the article or the podcast, or any definition kind of like stick out to you, one that you hadn't heard of or like thought about before. Because again, I had never thought to like look up the term race relations like ever, because I just didn't like think about it. I thought about the idea, but I never thought about like what it was defined as. Kirsten, set your hand? Oh yeah, go ahead.
One thing that really kind of stood out to me is, I think maybe in the first paragraph of the article, and says that as well as becoming aware of how white people participate, often unknowingly, in racism, and this idea that like white people don't know that they're being racist, I think is a very like complex idea, because it's like consciously they may not know, but they do know. Because I was watching this Jane Elliott video, and she had asked white people like,
yeah,
do you want to be Black? And no one raised their hand, because no, you don't want to be Black. And so it's like, if you know how Black people are treated and you know enough to know that you wouldn't want to be Black, to me it doesn't make sense to unknowingly participate in racism, because it's like you see how Black people are treated and you continue to do certain things. And so it's like this idea of like people not knowing, to me, is just very complex. And I know that some people are going to be like, literally, I didn't know that that was racist, but it's like, how would you feel if you were Black and someone said that to you? Or like, how would you feel if someone said that to you in any other sense? And so I think that that was something that like just really made me think throughout the article. I was just like, but they do know. So yeah, I liked that comment in the article.
Yeah, go ahead, Maya.
I'm gonna add to that. So I found that really interesting because that stuck out to me in the article. But I recently had this conversation with people who did not identify as me. leadership at my current school. And it was interesting to me that they spoke in ways that, oh, if we don't speak up, it's not saying that we're racist. We just don't have anything to say. And I thought that was really interesting because the students that they teach, they show hatred to students that look like me. So because you're not addressing it at all, your silence is still a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was really interesting for me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just follow up on those comments. Yeah, that strikes me as well. This idea of not knowing, about racism or not knowing that you're racist, and I think the essence is right. And that the problem might be that you should know, right? And I think that maybe not caring sometimes leads to not knowing because you don't care enough to learn and to know and to be reflective about yourself and your actions and your place in society and other people. And you're just, so I think that's right, that it's not, it's definitely not an excuse to say you don't know or don't realize things, because even if you don't, even if that's true, the fact is you should, right? You should know. It's something that's important and you should care about and you should know. So that's I think my general response to that is that if there's a problem of not caring, and that leads to the problem of not knowing.
Mm-hmm. And then also recognizing that like that's a privilege in itself to like not even care or like not even want to even think about it or not even want to say something or speak up because you feel like you're so far removed from it that you don't, one, maybe your opinion doesn't matter, which everybody can contribute to conversations. And that's how you learn and like that's how you grow, like in uncomfortability, right? And so I think that's also an interesting kind of idea that just because I'm not saying racial slurs or just because I'm not saying I hate Black people, like I'm not racist. But like you still can be, and you still can perpetuate it, right? Even if you aren't white, just in general, anybody can, right? And so that brings me to like something that I thought was interesting in the article as well, under whiteness, and it was labeled understanding whiteness. And it was a definition and said, or just a small paragraph, it said, racism is based on the concept of whiteness, a powerful fiction enforced by power and violence. Whiteness is a constantly shifting boundary, separating those who are entitled to have certain privileges from those whose exploitation and vulnerability to violence is justified by their not being white. Whiteness, like color and Blackness, are essentially social constructs applied to human beings rather than veritable truths that have universal validity. And I think the sentence that stuck out to me the most was this idea that whiteness is a constantly shifting boundary, separating, right? Like separating those who are entitled to privileges. And I'm thinking about this not even in terms of just white people, but a lot of people's proximity to whiteness. So thinking about I had a long conversation yesterday about this idea of like colorism, right? And being called in, being called out, being checked, and understanding that while you might not be white, your proximity to whiteness still perpetuates the problem, right? Your proximity to wealth can still perpetuate classism. And it doesn't matter if you're a part of a marginalized identity, right? It doesn't matter because you still hold, again, this idea of like, you're still entitled to certain privileges. And so I think that's why I thought it was so interesting that the person who had defined whiteness for them had distinctly said skin color. Because I can say like, yeah, I'm Black, like I identify as Black, but I am light skinned. And so again, like what privileges, thinking to myself, like what privileges does that afford me? And how can I navigate in certain different spaces and navigate different rooms and work different crowds because of that, right? And knowing that people know that I don't identify as white at all. And so I thought that was really interesting too. Anybody else have anything? Go ahead, Mike.
That kind of reminds me of like what I said whenever we were doing like backtracking what Blackness meant to me, like I said something along the lines of just kind of Black people doing the most for the culture by just existing while fighting to exist. But that's true, but also I feel like whiteness has been literally so loud, and it's not just in spaces where people consider there to be white-Black relations. Like in Africa, there is colorism, there is things that people like, there's literally effects of white supremacy in wanting to be close to whiteness is possible, and that's in areas where people don't even consider themselves to be Black, but because there's Black people everywhere. So it's just crazy to me just how like it's been so, whiteness is just so loud, and I just kind of I just become more aware of it because even in where I'm from, like skin bleaching is very popular. So it's just kind of crazy just how much it's really, whiteness has been like the norm. It's the standard for all things that is good in a lot of societies around the world. But
Yeah, definitely thinking about like whiteness and white being like the default, which somebody else had said like in the survey, like it's just the norm. And thinking of race and thinking of how you racially identify, there's always this idea like there's white and then there's other. Like there's white and then there's people of color. But it's never just like, I mean, like it's always just those two like binaries, I feel like. Like when we're talking about white or just like race and whiteness. I feel like my computer going slow. Can y'all hear me still? Oh, okay, cool. Anybody else have thought? Oh,
I just have a thought on that. So my mom was reading something about like the definition of diversity, and like when everybody says, like when these white institutions are like, we need more diversity, what is the diversity from? Whiteness. Like nobody's like, we need like, it's just such a like ingrained thing that everybody assumes that everything's already white, and then they have to divert from that. Is upsetting and kind of annoying,
Yeah. Dr. Trump, you had something?
Yes, I wanted to, first of all, wonderful conversation. I'm loving this. I'm loving the fact that I'm coming back to Mizzou because y'all are so, you're so nuanced in how you think about race. Not to take anything away from UMass, Jackie, but one of the things I missed about being away from Mizzou was this level of engagement with the topic and with these topics that sprout from the topic of race. But I wanted to talk a little bit about something AJ said in some comments earlier about Get Out and what it means when we think about that main character as actually he's British, right? So he's Black Brit. And I remember when Harriet Tubman came out, that film, there was so much conversation around, what does it mean that they cast someone who is not African-American in that role, And so it's something that I think about a lot, similar to Vida, yeah? That it's really important to, as we think about Blackness and whiteness, that we also really spend time thinking about Blackness, because I remember at Mizzou when stuff went down in 2015, I don't know if any of you were there except maybe Adam and Stephanie, everybody, I'm not sure if anybody else was there in 2015, but I remember that when African-American students were really trying to push the institution to do the right thing, to pay attention to Mike Brown and all of that, that the African students wanted to stay away from it. They really wanted to dissociate themselves from the movement. And even after the African-American students got, statements and letters from the Jewish students, all the different groups, they did not hear from the African students until a couple of people had to push them and say, look, you're Black too. That police officer is not gonna stop and ask you if you're from Kenya or Nigeria or New York. They're just gonna stop you. you know, and so we started to have that conversation in 2015. I don't know how it is now. I feel like I would hope that at Mizzou that those different camps of Blacks or that represent Blackness, that they're beginning to come together. I don't know. I know at UMass there's a very strong Jamaican group, there's a Cape Verdean group, there is a Haitian group, very, very strong on the East Coast. But at Mizzou, it's typically mostly African Americans and Africans, and that group is not always together. And I think that there needs to be a conversation about why that is. And a lot of it comes from the parents of these African students. You know, I'm a parent of African students as well. And so I recognize that a lot of that comes from the socialization that happens in the house of African immigrants.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing all that. Anybody have like a comment to that? She just dropped a lot of knowledge. Some heat. I think again, like one thing that I have been constantly thinking about too is this idea of like we talk about like representation mattering, and we talk about how important it is to cast Black actors, actresses in films, in roles, in TV shows. And then also looking at it and taking a step further, like just like what Black people are we casting, and are we telling only Black stories? Again, like, are we only telling Black stories of able-bodied Black people, only light-skinned Black people? And so kind of reworking and thinking about this idea of representation. And again, like they mentioned in the podcast, how Blackness is so different in the diaspora of Blackness that Vida had even mentioned earlier in the conversation. It's such a wide range that, again, I think it brings up this conversation of, well, I mean, you Black, so like we did it, or like we Black, so we casted you, but not trying to look at the importance and the importance of different experiences, and the importance of like just all of our differences within the entire diaspora, right? So that's a really good point to bring up, even just thinking about Mizzou and a lot of people who I think are a lot of Black people specifically are finding like their voices in Mizzou, and they're finding their voices in activism at Mizzou specifically. So yeah, I definitely think like that's important to highlight and bring up as well. Did anybody else have thoughts about that or anything?
To jump back to what Dr. Shonikin was talking about, I studied abroad in France, and I just talk about it a lot. That's why I laugh. And I was in like southern France, which is like a really big like gate, I guess, for Africans like up into Europe. And so there is like a really heavy like African presence there. And I just like remember a lot of instances where like almost the opposite, like people, like there was a privilege in being like a Black Westerner versus like and like someone who's African. Like a lot of just people would be like, oh, like, well, you're like American, you're Western, like that's very different, which it is totally a different experience. But just like the connotation behind that is like, oh, well, it's like a good thing because you, again, the proximity to whiteness, and the way that I was socialized, and the way that I like present myself as a, you know, to a French person, a white French person, is like much more digestible for them. And so, you know, you just reap the benefits from that too, which I think is also interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else? Maybe somebody.
I have one thought.
Sorry.
That's okay. I had one thought on what you said earlier on how like a lot of people are finding their voice in activism at Mizzou, and I mean, like I definitely am also, but the unfortunate part about it is that, I mean, fortunate and unfortunate, because there are so many problems at Mizzou already. Like our administration is just like, there's so much pushback, and they're not listening to people. Like, they're not listening to people of color, they're not listening to Black voices, and they're not listening to white voices that are advocating for those other voices, you know. And it's kind of almost easy to find your place in activism at a place that has so many issues, you know. Like, if we're thinking past that, in a perfect world where, you know, racism isn't even a thing or something like that, which never happened, but like, past that, what would the solutions be, even like if all the systematic change was reversed? Like, what problems would be in place?
And I
then,
think,
you know.
Oh yeah, and not to cut you off, and I think
You're good.
one thing that I'll challenge about that is this idea that we can never like live in a post-racial society, or that there is like no progress that can be made towards institutions or like reforming institutions, because a lot of what conversation is happening now, just in the general sense, like not even just thinking about Mizzou, because Mizzou is a small institution compared to literally the entire world, right? And anti-Blackness that is across the entire world, within all communities, not just white communities, right? Is that this idea to reform a system or reform things that were built for the disenfranchisement of Black people, I think is an important key part to like remember, and to always think about when we're even talking about like ourselves and like referring to ourselves as activists. And because like I can have conversations, but like I'll never be like, yeah, I'm an activist because I do X, Y, and Z, like, because then at that point it gets performative. So it's kind of just like thinking to yourself, like, why do you need props, or like, why do you need to, like, why do you, not you specifically, but like just speaking to all non-Black people in this instance, but like, why do you as a non-Black person need to find a solution, or you need to see the solution? When really it's like up to us. It's up to people who are marginalized to know, like, okay, and my words are gonna jump, but like basically what we want is the solution, not what non-Black people believe the solution to be. Because a lot of the times what we believe the solution to be is, again, reform, reworking a system. Like, we can't reform or rework systems that are inherently violent and racist. And so I kind of wanted to make sure I added that specifically too when we're thinking about like Mizzou as an institution as well. I think Aisha then Logan, Aisha Logan then Maya.
Yeah, just to kind of go off of what AJ was saying, I'm kind of thinking back to that point about what is the role of non-Black people, white people and non-Black people of color in this. And I think what AJ is basically saying is like, and something that I've been thinking about personally is to just be quiet, because we don't know, right? We can't decide the solution. And when we decide that we know the answers, we are also being racist in that regard, because we have assumed that somehow we know how to fix the problem that we caused, right? So I think it's really important when you are in these spaces to just think like, I'm just here to listen and do what I'm told. I'm here to just support the cause. And yeah, there is guilt involved, but guilt is never a productive emotion. It's just showing up, being there, and not trying to say too much. And that's something I'm also working on as well. So.
Yeah. And then Maya, did you have something? Or Logan? Yeah. Okay. My bad.
Oh yeah, I was just going to talk a little bit about, we were talking earlier about like African immigrants being different from like African Americans, and the idea of like Black being a racial term that's racialized specifically for America, and it was created for America in the sense that we know it. And so like the idea that we'll never be able to live in a society without it, I think is flawed, because if it's something that we built and we created, then it's something that we inherently have the ability to deconstruct and get rid of altogether. And so the problem with that is that folks want to believe, white folks, I mean, want to believe that there's some way that they can keep what we have as a means of and just kind of like moving things around a little bit and everything will be okay because that's what they believe happened in the past. When in the reality, the same system has just been changed over and over again to like achieve the same purposes, which require, like, by their design, an anti-blackness, because all of what we have, our entire economy, our entire capitalist, society, was built on the backs of those people that we created to be black, and so we made them share this umbrella, and then now no one wants to share that umbrella with them because if you're black, that makes you somehow inferior. And so when you ask white people to like realize that and make them realize that they've been making these people, dig a hole just so they can feel taller, and that like you make them look into that hole by making them like confront their own whiteness, they become so defensive and so hesitant because they realize how bad racism is, because we're taught to realize how bad racism is, but not recognize how we perpetuate a racist system. And so it's like in the art or in the podcast, they talk about how like reparations today, like that, the 40 acres and a mule, if that were to be like adjusted for today, it would be like 10 to 12 trillion dollars or something, which is like 3 to 4 times the federal budget every year. It's like asking them to recognize what that number is because like you're faced with how this issue has, snowballed and created such a large scale issue that we are now having to face, and it becomes, we're so ready to write it as insurmountable, even though people have been climbing that mountain for, years and years, and the work's been done. It's just stopping to listen to the people who've been doing the work, because and historically they've been like black women, who has been historically the most silenced and the least listened to.
Yeah. And I just want to recognize it is 7:31. If you have to leave, I was going to wrap up the next couple minutes, but if you have to leave, feel free to. Period. So yeah. But Maya, you can say your last comment, then we can wrap it up. Thank you all too for like staying after 7:30 time.
I just wanted to add from what you said, AJ, and then also Logan, about activists. I thought it was really interesting the way people use the word activist, because there are people who are really knowledgeable. But then the idea and the concept of Americans, not even just African Americans or different people who are under the umbrella of American, there's a concept that America is better than anything and anybody. So when something goes against it, there's like a turned shoulder. I think that's the same for me in my eyes. I think that comes to light with activism as well, because a lot of people who are knowledgeable, they don't have patience for the people who don't understand. So I think it's very interesting when, I don't remember who's mentioned it, but someone mentioned like, what's the next step? How do you move forward? How do you bring more people together? I think it's important that you bring everyone together. The people who don't understand but wants to, they just don't understand it at the level you do.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of point to bring up too. I don't know how many of you know about it, but like just like the songs that dropped between J. Cole and No Name, and this idea that that's a whole nother unpacking. But I see some reactions like, yeah. But yes, just to wrap everything up, because it is 7:33. Thank y'all again so much for coming. I really appreciate y'all. And then everybody should have access to the Google Drive with like the shared resources and materials. We will be talking specifically about Get Out next time. And if you don't have access to that, I'll be emailing access out probably within the next week or so, because I want to make sure everybody kind of has access to the film. Thank you to those who have donated to buy the film. Appreciate you. XOXO, you know who you are. But next time we'll be, I just want to leave everybody with these questions to kind of think about for next time. But this idea, like, what is the sunken place? How do we and how do you relate to this idea of double consciousness? Because if we didn't learn today, we know that we all have a role in Blackness and whiteness and how we uphold those things and how we uphold systems, right? So how do you relate to it? How do you racially relate to it as well? And then also, what's this idea of the general public's their want and need to control Black bodies. And you can think about that in terms of physical control, again, sexual control, because like, I don't know how many know this, but sexualization of Black people, Black bodies, Black women, specifically is very, very important, especially at times like this, when we're talking about the murders of Black trans women. And so, yeah, I want us to kind of think about those 3-ish questions, which is also on the Google Drive if you can't remember what I just said. And so, yeah, we'll be like watching a movie again, listen to a couple podcasts, and like reading a short article. But yeah. Again, thanks y'all. And if you have recommendations or suggestions or anything, I'm super open. A lot of y'all got my number or at least my email address, or follow me on anything. So literally just hit me up because I was looking to improve.
Good job, AJ.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Don't feel like y'all gotta stay. I'm gonna stay, but like, yeah. Bye, friends. See y'all.
Thank you.
Yes, no problem. Goodbye, all.